On today's Newsmakers, horror in Pakistan, Christian support for Israel, and Danny Gokey's new album, that and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each and every week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, should Christians support Israel? That's a question that we ask Dr. Jeff Myers. It's also the name of his new book on this very complex topic. Let's welcome him to Newsmakers to break it all down. Should Christians support Israel? This is the title of your new book, and it's a great title. I think this is a battle, a debate a lot of people are having outside of the church, but obviously inside of the church. Should Christians do this? Why did you write this book?
I wrote it because I was concerned about Gen Z. Back in November, had seen a polling piece that said that 51% of young adults said they thought Hamas was justified in its attacks on Israel. And that number went up to 60% in December. By then, I knew I needed to do something. I wrote an opinion editorial piece for the Daily Wire called "Congratulations, America, You've Raised a Generation of Terrorist Sympathizers," which got a lot of attention and led to the opportunity to travel to the land and spend time with citizen soldiers, with survivors, with hostage families, with leaders who could give me insight and help me grapple with the tough questions that Americans are grappling with about justice and social justice and just war and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers have continued to be alarming. There have been a number of other surveys saying very similar things about Israel's existence, which side are you on, essentially. This is going to be a broader question, and then I want to get into your trip, talk a little bit about what you saw, what you experienced. But why do you think Israel is always at the center of our news, of our geopolitical issues? It seems like Israel is the thing that we're always talking about, and it doesn't change. In fact, since October, it's become an even bigger issue.
I think for people on the progressive left, Israel is a proxy for the United States. So you can't come right out and attack the United States because you'll lose support. But if you attack Israel, that's fine. And by doing so, you can attack the United States. The very same people who are going after Israel right now are the people who are the biggest critics of the United States of America. And I think that's why anti-Semitism has such traction in Gen Z. Only 16% of Gen Zers say they're proud to be Americans.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear what you're talking about here, because you have a situation where people literally paraglided, invaded into a country, raped, killed, murdered, slaughtered people, did all these horrific, evil things. And the country they came in and did that to then responded to try to stop the terrorist organization responsible for that. And somehow Israel, that country defending itself, has been painted to be the one that is genocidal, violent. It's a very bizarre dynamic in the news. And not to say that mistakes don't happen in war, that issues don't happen, but the point is that people who did the horrific thing, Hamas, it's as though we've taken all those labels and given them to Israel, it feels, at least from my perspective. Why do you think that inversion is allowed to happen the way that it has?
I think that's a super tricky question. Let me just give a fact that relates to the situation to set the context. John Spencer, who is America's leading expert on protecting non-combatants in a time of war, says that Israel has done a better job than any nation in history, including the United States and Iraq and Afghanistan, at protecting non-combatants. The problem is that people have embraced the idea that you really can look at the entire world through an oppressor versus oppressed mindset. And our professors say that Israel is the oppressor, Hamas is the oppressed. Therefore, it's a clear-cut moral case. Israel is the one Jewish state in the world. There are 57 Islamic states. But there are always people who look at everything Israel does more negatively. In Syria, more than 1 million people died in their civil war. If you Google Syrian atrocities and then you Google Israeli atrocities, you will find there are 4 times as many articles about Israeli atrocities as Syrian atrocities, even though 25 more times the number of people were killed in Syria than have ever been killed in wars against Israel.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors. It is complicated, and I want people to grab the book, but people, especially young people, asking this question of what do we do, right? You have a war going on. You do have innocent people who are going to die in war. How should believers respond to the Gaza war? What would you tell those young people in particular? Although I think this is a question people have across the board.
I want young adults, well, all Americans really, to recognize that we've forgotten the principles of just war. Death is horrible in war, but death is not the worst outcome of war. We all die eventually. And the Christian thinkers such as Aquinas and Augustine, who wrote about just war, said it is a worse outcome that evil is allowed to prevail because that creates misery for millions of people during all of their lifetimes. I think we need to look at what constitutes a just war. If Israel's war tactics become unjust, then we call them on it. It will be the responsibility of the world community to help Gazans rebuild their lives, to become unindoctrinated because they have been indoctrinated for decades by Hamas propaganda, encouraging them to kill Jews as one of the primary aims of their lives. And I don't know. I don't see a solution to this. I think when I was in Israel, that's the most frustrating part. I don't see a solution to it, but you can manage situations like this. The relationship between South Korea and North Korea is managed. The relationship between China and Taiwan is managed. The relationship between Israel and Egypt is managed. These are not solved, but you can find a way to move forward and bring prosperity and hope to people.
Well, I appreciate you joining us today. The book is Should Christians Support Israel? Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Billy.
You can get Meyer's new book, Should Christians Support Israel, over at summit.org/Israel. We'll be right back with more Newsmakers in just a moment. Welcome back to Newsmakers. The situation for Christians in Pakistan continues to be horrific. David Curry, CEO of Global Christian Relief, joins us to discuss persecution, blasphemy laws, and what believers around the world can do to help. Let's welcome him to Newsmakers to break it all down. Appreciate you joining me, as always, to break down the state of Christian persecution. Let's talk a little bit about Pakistan. Pakistan has been in the headlines of late. From a 30,000-foot view, what is the state of persecution against Christians there in Pakistan?
Well, I would say that Pakistan is one of the most difficult countries to be a Christian, certainly because of the mob violence, because of the blasphemy laws. At the same time, I still have a sliver of hope that it has the possibility, as a democracy, as a country that knows, has some systems that still work, of being a real light in that region. But for now, what we have is a group that has been moving towards, closer and closer anyway, towards the rule of Islamic extremism. They have very strong blasphemy laws, which I describe as vigilante laws. They give any extremist the ability to make an accusation against a Christian that they have offended in some way Muhammad, and then rile up a mob to attack them. And many cases kill them. In some cases, they use blasphemy laws to imprison or give a death sentence to a Christian. And as near as I can tell, in all these years I've been doing this, I don't remember a case that seemed at all legitimate. So, I mean, it's just very common that there are false charges brought.
You talked about having some hope. There were recently some resolutions surrounding mob lynching and protection of minorities. Can you talk a little bit about those resolutions and if they give you additional hope, if there's a reason to still be concerned?
Well, I think, first of all, there are church structures, Christian structures, which have been grandfathered in. So you do have the presence of some church schools, some denominations which are allowed to function in Pakistan, but they're under great pressure. I've talked to many of these leaders. We've looked at how we can help support Christian schools peacefully. Existing within these Islamic communities, only somewhere less than 2% of the people in Pakistan are registered as a Christian. So it's a small population relative to what's going on. So and they have a court system, they have an election system. So that's what I mean. I think if the people woke up to say, like, we're not going to empower extremism, But the reality is blasphemy laws are protected by the courts for fear of mob violence. If what will happen on a Friday afternoon, if a Islamic leader gets up and says, we're going to attack because they're going to take away these blasphemy laws, and we want to impose even stricter Sharia laws. Remember, it's right across the border from where the Taliban is ruling, and that's a portion, small portion perhaps, but a powerful portion of Islamic leaders in Pakistan. That's how they would like to rule Pakistan if they could.
Well, it's helpful to understand, too, for us what is going on. In America, we have our debates and our battles over religious liberty and religious freedom, but we don't have to worry that we're going to be killed if we offend somebody, that we're going to be harmed, our job will be taken, our home will be razed if we say something that people don't like. And yet here we have a country in Pakistan where these things are very real, and a lot of places around the world where it's very real. And yet that shows you the true faith and true hope that these people have, that they're able to, despite what they face, continue believing. That's the first thing, and being unwilling to give up their faith. Just final question for you. What does it do for your faith when you see these people persist when they've lost everything simply because they are believers?
Well, I think I've gotten bolder because of it, more certain that there's no material good, there's no political government, there's no kind of thing that you might want in the world that's going to be sufficient to the peace, spiritual peace, knowing the power of the Holy Spirit to give somebody peace in the midst of trauma. And so I think it's made me bolder, more active, certainly in my faith, and I hope I'm maturing over as I go through this. I think it's important. But the other thing is, as you mentioned, we see shadows of persecution, censorship, intolerance towards faith. There are battleground areas that we're seeing across Western Europe, in the US, around how you educate your kids. Do you have the ability to educate your own children in your faith? Censorship, the laws around freedom of gathering. These are all coming to us. We're next, so to speak, but we can learn the lessons from the persecuted church, or how they've kept strong.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, even in Finland, Pavi Razanen, you go down the line, she's the politician who's been, fighting a battle over sharing Bible verses, and it's insane that we're watching some of these things happen. And I think what you said is important. And I think it's a reminder, too, of continuing to fight for the First Amendment that we have here in this country to ensure that we maintain those freedoms that we have, because you look at these other countries and you think this is the end result of not having those protections and those freedoms. And that is a terrifying thing. And so I appreciate you taking the time, as always, breaking it all down. We wish you good luck on your upcoming travels.
Thank you, Billy. Appreciate it.
You can go to globalchristianrelief.org for more on Pakistan and other nations around the world facing persecution. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we sat down with Christian singer Danny Gokey to talk all about his faith, his new music, and his path into the entertainment industry. Let's welcome Danny to Newsmakers.
So Danny Gokey, Sound of Heaven, this album is hitting this summer. Tell us about the inspiration for the title.
Okay, so there's a lot that went into this album. And because I'm a person who's come from a very diverse background. I'm raised in so much culture being around me. And so I remember as I started writing the songs and seeing the different themes and the inspirations, I was like, man, this is a very eclectic album. And I was like, man, there's the theme of hope, theme of Christ, they're all good, but the sounds are different, because people know I really CCM. There's gospel feel, there's that Latin, and when I wrote Sound of Heaven, I was like, this is it. This is how I put this all under the banner. It's the sound of heaven. Because I always pray before I go into an album, because God is the greatest songwriter of all time. And I'm like, Lord, give me some inspiration. Because I believe when we get to heaven, we're going to see that the sounds of heaven are so diverse. And I just was able to capture a little bit into this album of the diversity. Because his creation's diverse, cultures are diverse, language is diverse. Like, think about all that. And I love that I get to have this ability to wrap this in a sound and a theme all around Christ that can just go far, can go beyond maybe what the norms and the standard is.
Yeah, your music's always that way. It always sounds different, which is unique. Like, I love that. A lot of artists, which is fine, everything you hear, you're like, oh, I know it's that person. But with you, it's like, no, that might be different than the last single you had.
Absolutely.
And so that's an intentional thing, I would imagine, then, in light of what you just said.
Absolutely. And we have our lanes, we have the lanes of the singles that go to the radio are typically these songs that, fit that radio lane, but outside that lane. Like, I just released a song called Todo el Mundo, which has Afrobeats in it. I love Afrobeats. Like, I got into it last year. There's a lot of Christian Afrobeat artists. So I was able to bring Limo Blaze onto it and then reggaeton artists into it. And so you have this thing of like this gringo guy singing, who sings in Spanish and speaks Spanish, with this, Dominican guy and with this African guy. And it just came out to be really cool. I got some worship on this album. I started in worship. And so I was going back to some of those roots of writing worship songs that, hopefully we'll be singing in church pretty soon. And then you have the hope songs, the hope that, for me, I never want to just do something because this is what people say I should do and this is what makes money. Because there is that, you can play this off, this is what makes the most money. And of course, we got to survive.
Sure.
But I want to be so authentic to what God has created me to be.
Yeah. Well, how do you deal with that, right? Because that is a facet of the industry. Whenever there's attention on you and you're trying to bring attention to God, there's, I would imagine, a tendency to get sucked into that. How do you keep yourself so grounded? Because you are incredibly grounded.
Well, I mean, with all the hype that goes around us, right? The thing, we never do well if we're trying to be something that we're not, right? What do they say? Like, authenticity, if you read vibrations, like the whole world is on vibrations and sounds, and is the highest of the chart being authentic to who you are. And that's how God created me. So I always try to go back to that and not try to chase. Of course, we're here chasing a dream, right?
Sure.
It's the dream to do. And
5 albums, it's impressive, right?
Yeah. But chasing money too, like, if you start chasing money, that becomes the God. And what if God wants to reveal something new in you that maybe not make a lot of money yet, but will in the future? I don't know. Like, I'm a person that I like to experiment. I like to explore. I get bored easy. And so I kind of like to have this.
Yeah. Well, when you go back to the pre-Idol days, right? You go back to your life before and you look at, like, looking back on that now, what shocks you the most about the trajectory where you've been?
Whew. I have to think about that. Obviously that at one point, like, that people would know my music. I didn't know. I kind of gave up my dream while I was doing ministry in a church. I was a worship leader and driving a semi, that this was over. At 27, I told Lord, I think I missed my mark. I always do music because I love it. But thank God I was able that he wasn't done yet and that it was just about to be the beginning.
Yeah, I know that's incredible. I mean, that's what we all need to aspire to, right? Yeah. No matter what we're doing, right? Not just music, no matter where you are in life. I often think about when you have a platform like you have, there are things that people want you to say or not say, and there are things you want to say and not say, and you're in a world where there's so much going on. How do you weigh that responsibility? Because you're inspiring people through music, but I'm sure you have to hold yourself back sometimes.
I do. So I've been through this. For the last 4 years, I've learned a lot about social media, saying and what not to say. But I want to be a truth teller. There's no point in beating around the bush. Now, truth and love teller, right? Not just a truth teller. I think words are so polarizing now that we have to recognize the state we're in, and to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. But I think we should never get away from speaking the truth in love. Truth sets people free. I'm reading a book right now called Erasing Hell, and there's a lot of people don't talk about hell anymore, right?
People don't even believe in it.
Yeah, they don't, because we polarize it out of the scriptures. And as I'm reading this book, I'm like, man, this is so needed right now because it's the truth. Whether you want to believe it or not, like, whether you believe we live in a day and age where we can kind of outlaw truth, right? We can sit there and protest gravity. We can make laws against gravity.
We can cancel people.
Yeah, you can cancel people over saying gravity's real or that fire is hot. But the thing is that it is what it is, and we're not doing any favors, playing around and mincing words to make people happy. We need to have the truth that sets people free. So I do want to speak truth, but I want to do it in love, and I just don't want to hit people on the head with it.
Yeah, no, and I want to ask you too, because you do a lot of really powerful work through Better Than I Found It. And let's talk about that, because that's another piece of your legacy and your life.
I think what makes things more effective is that we show the love of Christ more than we talk about it. Because talk is cheap, that is. Words, they seem to have no value. Though they do, but we treat it like it doesn't. But Matthew 5:16 is that, let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. We were just doing a Better Than I Found It give back yesterday. There's this 16-year-old girl who at 10 years old started, her mom worked for nursing homes, and she went there and she would talk to the seniors in the nursing home, and she would ask them, if you had 3 wishes, what would they be? And she thought it'd be Lamborghinis, money. They just wanted a candy bar. They wanted socks. They wanted to see family. And she couldn't believe it. So she started her nonprofit at 10 years old, granting 3 wishes. So we went there yesterday, and we found out that the roof of her nonprofit was leaking, so we fixed her roof. We found out that her kitchen needed redone, so we redid a whole new kitchen makeover for her in her community center. And what was the last thing we did? We did one more thing. Oh, we had an Amazon wish list where we had all these people send stuff. And then we asked her mom, we surprised her mom. So we surprised with this. Then we asked her mom, we said, what's her 3 wishes? She's a 16-year-old girl.
Wow.
And her mom said, well, her daughter's simple. And so she wanted candy bar, candy, her favorite candy, makeup. And then we heard that her dog passed away, so we bought her a new dog.
Oh, wow.
So Better Than I Found It is going out, finding the people who are changing the world in their corners of the world. And we find out what they need so they can keep going and be inspired to keep doing what they're doing.
Well, I love that. I love it. The album is Sound of Heaven. Danny Gokey, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Billy.
You can get Danny's new album, Sound of Heaven, wherever music is sold. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you'll find the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our daily Newsmakers podcast. We feature one full episode, one full interview every single day. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. As for this show, we'll see you again next week.